Everyone. Hello, everyone. Let's see. I'm just going to spotlight over here. Hi, I'm so excited to see so many fun, familiar names and some cool places you all are from. Super exciting. I'm Melissa Esplin. I'm a calligraphy instructor and artist from Utah. I see some Utah friends here too, which is really fun. We live literally on top of a mountain. So we just got 6 inches of snow recently, which is super fun. I'm getting excited to get into the holiday spirit. So excited for winter really to get into full swing. So this craft is something that I love to do. I love making greeting cards. I love sending cards to people. I love snail mail. There's something about that, something that's not a bill coming in the mail that just puts a smile on my face. And I know it puts a smile on so many other people's faces. So a couple of things that I want to focus on with this experience today. We are not about doing something perfect. We are about doing something creative and fun and having a great experience with watercolors. So I don't want you to think, oh, I didn't do it exactly the way that I have it in my head. So that's not what we're about. We're about embracing what happens on the paper. Watercolor can be, for a lot of people, a really unruly medium, and it can be intimidating. And I don't want that to be that focus for you. I want it to be fun and exciting and experimental and enjoy what happens on the paper. So our objectives for today, I want you to get more familiar with color mixing, and I want you to get familiar with how to draw out the best line quality with your watercolor brushes. And we're going to work on how to embrace lettering with our watercolor brushes. Now, we don't have a ton of time to go over the classic elements of lettering. So this is not a lettering class, and I don't want to disappoint you. But I do want to give you the tools and the theory needed in order to feel confident in writing your own letters, drawing out your own letters on a page. So it's like a hybrid class. I want to get you familiar with how to hold the pen, because that is really going to give you the most success as you start to learn letters, if that's something that you're excited about. Now, if you really want to learn more about calligraphy, I teach calligraphy classes, brush lettering, and pointed pen modern calligraphy online at calligraphy.org. So if you'd like to join me there, I would love to see your work. It includes one-on-one feedback. And then also, I've included in your handout, hopefully, did you get a handout? Do you see the download the template in the chat? You can download this and use it so that you don't have to worry about trying to replicate exactly what I've done. I will show you a technique on how to trace this out. So, so on your handout, we've got the lettering already done for you, so you don't have to think about it. You also have a QR code for where to purchase all the materials that I'm using today. That's all on michaels.com. I love Sakura so much. Most of my art materials that I use on a daily basis come from Sakura. Not only is it because they have really great materials, but they work well. I like to work in both painting and drawing. And the Pigma Professionals and the Micron pens, they're all waterproof. So I feel very confident in being able to mix media. Now, if you have different materials, it's going to work with the materials you've got. But if you're looking to upgrade your materials this holiday season, I highly recommend it. So let's talk about the materials that we are using today. So I have the Sakura Koi 24 pan set. This is really nice because it's a travel set. You have sponges here. It comes with a little water brush. I'm using a bigger water brush today. This is the large round water brush. If you don't have the Sakura water brush, Any water brush will do, or any round brush will work. I would highly recommend a pointed round brush, like a size 8 to a size 10. This is about the equivalent of a size 8. And the lovely thing about this, and what I look for in all of my brushes, whether it's markers or bristle brushes, is that I can create a nice point here. Well, let's see if I can focus in on that. See how that point comes together? And this is an old brush. I've had this for a couple of years. So you just, if for the product info, Ashley, I highly recommend just searching up that QR code on the handout. It'll take you directly to michaels.com, and you can search through that Sakura Koi Water Brush Large. So this is the large one, and it has the large reservoir too. Because we're doing this all from my beautiful office, I am using the larger vessel. When I'm on the go, I use the smaller vessel because it's really great to have that. So, so yeah, I've got this water brush here. I also have water, a jar of clean water. I like to make sure that this water is nice and warm. Why warm? Because we want to activate these pigments. And I have a little pipette here. You don't need a pipette. You can just use your watercolor brush to just make sure that you have your pigments soaking. You want to get your pigments wet. And this is something that you want to do with all of your watercolor paints, regardless of where they come from. You want to activate these pigments, especially with warm water. You get more saturated pigment that comes out, and your brush has to work less in order to pull those pigments off the pan. So it helps with the wear and tear of your brush. So, so I have the water brush or the watercolor palette that comes with a nice clean palette. I don't ever clean my palettes. I like to keep them dirty because I love juicy, delicious, moody colors. And we're going to talk about how to create those moody colors today. You have a ruler, optional. Totally, you don't need one. I will not be using one today if I can help it. Then I have an assortment of just normal cardstock, and I have watercolor paper. This is Arch's cold press watercolor paper. It's got kind of the nice balance between a good tooth and not too much tooth that you lose the detail. So I also have envelopes. I forgot to grab empty envelopes. I may go grab those in just a minute when we work on those, and a postage stamp if you're going to send this. And I highly recommend you send your cards. All too often I'll make cards and they don't get sent in the mail. So I would recommend sending them today. Okay, so now that we have the materials go, oh, I also have a mechanical pencil, and optional, if you're feeling a little intimidated by drawing these lines straight, I have a watercolor pencil as well. Do I have special envelopes to watercolor on? Great question, Sue. No, I don't. I just use regular paper. And there are some pluses and minuses to that, and I'll show you once we get to watercoloring those envelopes in a bit. I'm going to go grab my envelopes really fast so that you can see what that looks like. Just take a couple seconds. I've got an assortment of envelopes from dark and light, and we'll show you how the watercolor is affected by that. Okay, now that we've covered materials, if you have questions about materials, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as they pop up. Mixing colors. Let's talk about mixing colors. Let's talk about our color wheel for a minute. So this right here is a cute little watercolor, a color wheel that I got. It's a little enamel pin. I saw it advertised to me on Instagram and I was like, wait, I need this. But it's really helpful. So I want you to notice, let's see, let me change cameras. I want you to notice on here, it's got my complementary colors. So does the opposite in the color wheel. So what we want to understand in the color wheel, Roy G. Biv, right? The whole spectrum is everything opposite of each other. It cancels the other out. So if I want to create a very muted red, like a burgundy red, I'm going to add green to it. The more green I add, the more muted it becomes, to the point where it becomes a total neutral. And you can play around. Green and red mixed together differently. They make a different kind of neutral than, say, purple and yellow do. Those are going to create very different neutrals. So you can play around with those neutrals and find your own versions of brown, but you can also play around with muting the basic primary colors. So that's what I want you to think about, is we're looking at the color wheel and we're muting those colors based on what we know in the color wheel. So I'll refer back to this as we mix our pigments. Okay, so we've got our color wheel here. I like to swatch out all of my palettes whenever I buy a new watercolor palette. What does that mean? So it means that I am going through and with a clean brush and with clean water, I'm drawing a little square with the pigment on watercolor paper. I prefer to use watercolor paper than any other paper because it gives me an accurate view of what that color is going to look like on the paper that I'm working on. So as you get into some of the professional pigments and like tube pigments, it's really, really important to understand that those pigments look very different in the pan or in the tube than they do on the paper. So it's really, really important to swatch those things out. So if you look at, say, this beautiful indigo right here, so it's the third one down and the third one over. On the palette itself, it looks almost black. So it's really important to be able to swatch those out so you see the difference between those colors and you understand what that's all about. So I highly recommend swatching those out. So let's talk about our pigment. I really want to have a triad with this card today. So the triad is analogous. What does that mean? I want 3 colors, and I want analogous, means that they're next to each other. So I want 3 pigments that are next to each other in the color wheel. So I want to pull from greens and blues, and I want them to be muted. So this is my muted wintry colors. I really love the colors that you see on evergreen trees, the colors that you see from the deep blue sky that comes right after a snowstorm. And I want to see the pale sagey colors. So we live in the desert, high desert mountains. So we have a lot of sagebrush, and that gets covered, that gets snow capped, and it's really beautiful. So that's another color that I'm pulling from. We've got sage, we've got evergreens, and we've got the sky. So we're creating these colors from what we see in real life. So so that's really my thought behind this wintry color palette. So how do we get these nice, deep, moody, wintry colors just straight from this palette that we've got? We could work from an even more limited palette. Most of the time I work in a palette of 6 to 12. So 24 feels pretty luxurious here. So we can make just about any color with this combination right here. So first, let's talk about the green. Personally, it's a little obnoxious that my favorite color isn't always just a convenience color that's on a palette. And that's just me. I love a deep, moody, wintry forest green, but I have yet to ever find a palette that has that on there, just ready to rock and roll. So we're going to make our own. The closest value that I've found here is this green that's 3 down and 2 from the right. It's this beautiful jewel tone green. I'm going to come over here and pull up this pigment. And well, for the sake of understanding this color, I'm going to actually clean off my palette for you. We're going to clean off this area right here. Normally, I would just mix it directly onto this green, but I do want you to see how the pigment changes as we add our color. So I've got my clean palette, I've got my full brush, and you see how this pigment, just come here, is very jewel tone. I want to mute that. I want to pull that down just a little bit, but I like the deep value of it. So I'm going to go, and what is opposite of green? Red. But we don't want to add red because I still want a little bit of vibrancy to it. So let's look at it this way. Let me make sure I'm in focus. Okay, so if I want to, so I've got my green here, but I want to mute it a little bit. I could add some red, but that's going to make it maybe a little too dark. If I go just over to the right and add an orange, then it's going to keep that vibrancy there, but it's still going to tone it down, because what makes orange? It's yellow and red together. So we may as well just add a little bit of a hint of orange. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to clean off my brush here. And I'm going to pull some of this bright orange. I may have pulled a little too much. You see how this is automatically transforming our color. Oh, look at that. It's just so beautiful. Look at that difference right there. All of a sudden it became way more wintry, something you would see in real life, because we added that complexity in color. So we want to do that. So this is our first color, and we've got a fair amount of pigment there, and we've got it wet, and it's just sitting right there. The next color we want to do, our first color, really, we can pull straight from it. I love this indigo color that we've got going on here on this palette. And if I want to make a really dark, deep indigo blue, and I don't have a deep, dark indigo blue naturally on my palette, what am I going to do if I want to mute it just a little bit? I want to add the opposite, or maybe just off of the opposite. So I have, let me pull out my little color chart here. So I've got my blue here. The opposite is, let's do this blue. That's more of a purpley blue. So I've got my blue here. My opposite is orange, but I don't want to keep it light. I want to make it darker. So I should go just along the color wheel and add a little touch of red. So if you have a blue that's just a little too light and you want to give it some depth and moodiness, just add a touch of red. Now you want to be careful with the red that you add. If you add a cool red or like a magenta color, like this one here, right here, you're going to get purple every time. But if you add a warm red that has an undertone of like an orangey pigment to it, it's going to start to pull towards black. So be very, very careful. So the color wheel, you guys are going nuts over these color wheels. Aren't they cute? Okay, so the color wheel is from thegraymuse.com, thegraymuse.com. So it's a really cute little color palette. It's very, very fun little color wheel. Okay, so I'm just going to pull this pigment straight over here. The next color we want to add to our wintry plaid is a light taupey sagey color, and we don't have that here. So I'm going to clean this off. Oh, I got a question from Bridget. Are you pushing water into the paint as you paint? Hopefully I can answer this. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by pushing the water into the paint. I'm making sure that my water brush is wet. I mean, there is water in the vessel. And the vessel, it pushes some paint, water into it. But I am working with a lot of pigment. I pre-wet my palette before I started mixing. So that allows me to pick up all of the pigment. And thank you, Lori, for putting the link in there. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I want to have this muted wintry sage green. So I'm going to pull my light blue. This is kind of like a, cerulean. It's a light blue. Yeah, I'd say it's really close to a cerulean. I want to mute it, but I also want to make it light. So how do we do that? I want to mute it. So I'm going to go towards the opposite end of the spectrum, and that is going to be an orange. But I don't want it to be green, like super green. So I'm going to mute that and go for a tan. I've got this nice little tan going on here. And I'm just adding a little bit at a time. So the tan, it's got yellow in it, right? Yellow is one of the most potent colors. It's got a lot going on. So you want to be very careful when you're adding yellow to your pigments, when you're mixing pigments, because the yellow can come through just really quickly. So I'm just adding a touch of blue to really calm that down. Now this is really saturated and it feels very dark. It's a little too dark for me. So how do I lighten that up? Do I add white? No, let me just use water. You can add white if you want some opacity to it. And we do have white in this palette, but I actually use that white more for adding cloudiness on top of my pieces, or adding little bits of lightness, little highlights, but I don't necessarily add it to the pigments as I'm mixing it in order to make it lighter. I'm just adding more water. So I'm diluting this quite a bit. And one of the things that I've learned about watercolor is that it wants to pull to the middle. And what does that mean? Pulling to the middle means that it wants to, all the darker pigments want to pull lighter, and all the lighter pigments, or like the transparent pigments, want to pull darker. So everything tries to pull to middle gray. So you've got to push a little bit farther. So if you want something really dark, you've got to add all of that pigment to make it very, very saturated. Now, if you want to make it a lot lighter, you've got to add a lot of water to the point where you're like, is this really even a pigment? And trust me, it'll dry light. Now, if you're going to say, create this card design and you're going to scan it and you want to scan it in, you're going to want to make things much, much darker. Let's see, I'm going to add that. Make that a little more green. Okay, so I made that just a little bit more green. So these are the colors that we're working with here. So this is just a straight pigment, just an indigo color. This is a mixture of basically a viridian green and a little bit of, what was it, orange. So there aren't a whole lot of orange, like an Italian orange would be great. And then this is like a cerulean blue with a yellow ochre. So a little bit of yellow in that ochre, a little bit of orange in that ochre, a little bit of muted tones to it. And a lot of water. So we've got our pigments ready. Now let's talk about line quality. We want to create line quality. And there are a couple of things to think about when we're drawing our lines on our page. First is how we hold the pen or the brush or whatever tool. I'm a calligrapher by trade, an instructor as well. And holding the pen is one of the things that I touch in every single class I teach, how to hold the pen. It's really important. Why is that important? A lot of people are like, no, just hold the pen how you hold the pen. Holding the pen properly, it protects your physical hand. So if you learn how to hold the pen properly, using a lot fewer muscles, and you're relying on the bigger muscle groups rather than smaller muscle groupings in order to hold the instrument, which will in turn give you a lot more longevity. So for example, I used to hold my pen kind of in a little claw-like grasp like this. You can see all of my knuckles were hyper extended. It's not a very comfortable grip, and I was using these small muscle groupings in order to make my markings. It also changes the pitch of my instrument. And by doing that, I gave myself some carpal tunnel issues, which is very unpleasant if any of you have experienced that. So, and not to say that carpal tunnel can't come by holding the pen properly, but you can delay the symptoms significantly by holding your pen properly. So by holding the pen or the brush with a loose grasp, that's going to make a huge difference. So if I'm just making basic strokes, my index finger and thumb are sandwiching my tool, my brush, and it's just directly in between. The same grip applies to your left hand as well. So I'll just hold it with the left hand so you can see both. So index finger and thumb are sandwiching the tool, and then my middle finger just supports underneath so that the pen or the brush doesn't fall underneath. And I want to make sure that my tool is actually hitting on this knuckle, this first big knuckle right there. I don't want it to fall into the pit of my hand. By falling into the pit, then it forces my thumb up and it forces a more flexed grasp in the wrist. We don't want that. So we want to keep that out. We have this nice oval shape happening with our hand. And if somebody were to come and walk behind me and grab the tool out of my hand, they'd be able to very easily because I have a light grip. Having a light grip is very important. And if you're struggling and you're like, I can't do this overnight, it's fine. You really can't. I want to teach you the theory to be able to do things after this class and try and practice so that you can explore and improve as you move forward. I don't expect you to perfect this in just a 1-hour workshop. If you're struggling to hold the pen with a very tight grip and you want to loosen your grip, grab your non-writing hand and grab something, another tool, another pen, pencil, whatever, and hold that nice and tight in your non-writing hand. Your grip will naturally release in your writing hand. So there's a little tip for you. Okay, but there's another grip. So if we're going to write lines, we don't want to use our fingers to draw the lines because we're drawing a line, for example, across this whole span right here. So we're drawing a line across this whole span. So if I'm using just my fingers or my wrist, I'm not going to get a very straight line. I'm just kind of going across and moving my wrist in a very uncomfortable position. I don't want to do that. We want to rely on our larger muscle groupings. And this is where we want to think about whole arm movement or upper arm movement, whatever you want to call it. I'm keeping my grip the same. And I'm actually pinning my forearm to the edge of my desk and I'm moving it along. So let's see if I'm going to switch to my camera view and zoom out a little bit. So I am moving my whole arm from side to side, just like that. So it creates this nice movement. I'm staying calm. It's really great. I'm not using my wrist to tweak and I'm like, what are we doing? So this is a much, much better movement using my full arm. My elbow is kind of the fulcrum of this movement here. And as you notice, let's look in here, you see my grip, it just changed from being on this knuckle to this knuckle. Now, by changing my grip ever so slightly, this gives me a more upright position so that I can kind of pin my wrist down on the ground and just keep moving. So Sarah asked the question, wouldn't that movement naturally give the line a curve though? How do you do a truly straight line? That's a fair point. We are moving our fingers ever so slightly to compensate for that arc, but we only have to move our fingers, like an inch or like a half an inch. We're only moving it ever so slightly to compensate for that. We're moving the rest of our hand very, very easily. So it takes some practice, but that's what we want to do. The other thing that we want to do is visualize this edge. So just to give us a little bit of contrast here. So I am going to visualize the edge of this paper right here, or the edge of this paper right here, okay? So I want to visualize that edge. If my eyes are tracking along that edge, I'm more likely to draw parallel to what my eyes are tracking. So it's this idea, and I feel like you can pull so many different life analogies to calligraphy and drawing and art and creation in general, just this creative process to our lives, right? We go where our eyes look. So if we want to look along this line, we're going to draw along that line. Now, if we're looking at just our brush, then we're going to be all over the place and it's going to be a bit of a mess. So the other thing that I want you to think about, or a lot of things to think about, I don't want to overwhelm you, but I want you to think about using fast, fluid motions. So if I go through and try and draw a straight line relatively slowly, let's pull this pigment up here. If I want to draw relatively slowly, and I'm just looking at my brush, I'm just kind of doing this, I don't know what's going on. And it's a bit of like, looks a bit like a mountainscape, right? There's nothing wrong with this line. It's just more shaky. So if we want to create a fluid line, you want to think things pretty quickly. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to just kind of keep that upright position, think butterfly thoughts, barely touch the page and just kind of move. And if you have to do practice strokes like this, you're just kind of like, okay, practice, 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 and bam. Look at how straight that is. Granted, I didn't get all the way across the full page, but that's pretty straight, right? That's a very nice, confident line. So, I've got some questions. Can you write or do fine motor work with your left hand too? I can write with my left hand. Do you want to see a lefty demonstration? It's going to be a lot shakier, but if I'm doing the same thing and I don't have a whole lot of desks supporting my left hand, let's zoom out just a little bit. So see how I don't have any desk right here under my elbow, but let's see, it's a little too bright. Let's get this a little darker so you can see what's going on with my left hand. Camera angle is not ideal, but I'm holding down the paper with my right hand and I'm trying to just make that stroke. And I just want to keep a nice light touch. My watch is getting in the way, but you can do these techniques with lefty just as well. If you keep the same positioning, your hand, the palm of your hand is what touches the paper. So you're not actually touching the paper with your pinky. You're kind of keeping it out of the way. So it's really just like this bone and this pad right here that touch the paper. So as long as you're using a correct grip and correct posture, you should have about a 4-inch gap between your pen tip or brush tip and what's actually touching the surface of the paper. So you shouldn't be smearing your work, is what I'm saying. Bill asks, and when you're doing lefty, do whichever direction is easiest for you. You don't have to do right to left or left to right. It's whatever you feel the most confident. I feel the most confident going from my inside out. So if I'm just sweeping away from my body, Some people find it's more confident sweeping towards their body. It just depends upon, you know, the application and what they're doing. I find it more comforting to sweep away from my body. Okay. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I'm just seeing the chat. We've got a lot of like just some cool left-handed stories. Would this work on wood also? Yes, these techniques work on everything. I feel like these techniques apply to most things. Okay, so we've got the idea of the color mixing. We've got the idea of how we want to do these lines. Now let's do the card. We only have 20 minutes left, but we can easily do the card. Okay, we're gonna finish the card. I promise. Okay, so I'm gonna grab my watercolor paper because I find it gives us more texture. And let's load that up. I'm gonna put this watercolor, I need the right size. My watercolor card underneath this, just so that you can see like edge to edge what's going on. I'm trying to flip this around. Okay. And this is where I want you to play and have fun. If you want to look at this example, switch cameras, you can. So we're going to start off with our right side. So I'm actually flipping the paper because, like I said, it's easier for me to go in towards my body and out and create the strokes outwards. So that is going to help you a lot. Sarah asked, I have 3 cameras. I've got the front facing and 2, like the overhead and then the side angle, because I feel like you need to see all the angles, especially when it comes to these details of how we load up the brush. So I'm going to start off by doing, so I'm just going to keep this card the same so we can do the same thing. I'm going to start off by doing a very light, fine hairline. This is our very top piece, okay? That light hairline, we want to load up our brush with plenty of pigment. So I've got my water, loading up more pigment, and I'm just getting it nice and wet. I want like a milky consistency. You want a lot more water than you think you need. That's one of the main tips I can give to anybody who's struggling with watercolors. Add more water. Okay, now I want to show you this, what I do as I load up my brush, especially if I'm doing fine line work. It's important that we twist our brush as we load it up. So I'm twisting the brush and loading it up. What does that do? It creates a nice fine point. We want to have a sharp point right there. That's going to allow us to get the finest line possible so we can create thick and thin lines all with the same brush. My watercolor teacher, when I was in high school, he said, you don't need all the different fan brushes and you need a good flat brush. I agree with that, but really a good, solid, high quality round brush in the size 8 or size 10 is going to get you 99.9% of the way. And he was right. So I am looking at the edge of my paper and I'm putting my hand, I'm going to load up my brush just a little bit down, like maybe a ½ an inch down. I'm not measuring these things. And I'm going to just swipe it along. So I did a quick movement. You see, it's not perfectly straight, but it's mostly straight. It's an organic, very natural brush, okay? And if I add one stroke to this side, I'm going to add it to the other side. I want to do it the same time. So I'm going to flip my paper. I'm going to do just about a ½ an inch down, work my way across. Okay, the next line that we're going to do is this beautiful muddy sage color. So we're going to do that muddy sage color next. And which color we're mixing, make sure we're using. Okay, so I'm using the sage, and the sage is that cerulean blue with a yellow ochre. And I'm loading up my brush. I'm just kind of sweeping it in and in. And This time, it's not crucial for you to create that perfectly sharp point because we want to create a big bold line. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going, instead of being upright like this, I'm moving my brush to the side so I can splay all those bristles out. I'm using my orientation to allow me to get those bristles all the way out. So I'm going to apply pressure and just work my way across with a lot of pressure. And I'm naturally going to run out of pigment towards the end, and that's okay. I can go in after and just create more, or I can embrace the texture that created. So you see that beautiful texture that's coming through? That's really, really lovely. So now I'm going to rotate my paper again, and I'm going to do that same line. Load up my brush, splay the bristles, and just go, go, go. So you see, we've got a little break up here. You can see that. I'm just gonna come in here and come in from the other side. Just create more consistency and have it go all the way off the page. Okay, so we've got those two done. Now the next two lines are going to be our forest green. So that's our Viridian green mixed with a little bit of orange. I'm going to load that up. And this was getting a little bit dry, so I'm going to mix a little bit more of that pigment. But we know exactly how to do it. We get that Viridian green, clean our brush out, grab that orange, and just mix, mix, mix. Now, if you need an exact color for a long period of time, oops. If you need an exact color, I suggest mixing up a lot more pigment than you think you need. Okay, I'm going to go up here and I want a very, very light touch and two lines that are close together. This is going to be a little tough, and if they intersect, that is totally fine. So I'm using that upright position, butterfly thoughts, and just bam, bam, two next to each other. Okay, I'm going to work my way across the horizontal side underneath there. And bam, and bam. Okay, now that we've got those done, I want to add this. See how we have this nice little intersection right here in the middle? We're going to do that. I feel like this is dry enough that we're not going to be bleeding everywhere. So I just want to visualize this middle. And if you end up skipping and you have to go back and retouch, there is nothing wrong with retouching, ever, ever, ever. Okay, so now our last lines, we want to pull in that dark blue. And we want to create a nice thick line with the dark blue, just so that it ends our plaid, right? We started with dark blue, we can end with dark blue. So it creates this nice bookend. Okay, I'm loading up my brush. And I'm going to start at the side. And come over here, load, load, load. And brush. This got a little bit too light for me, so I'm going to come over this way and work that in. See how this line tapered a little bit on the edge? I want to fill that out. Okay, so we've got our plaid. Looks really fun, doesn't it? Love that plaid. It's really is so clever. So I want to have the plaid on the right and the bottom, so I can just rotate it until we get the right thing. Okay, this is where our handouts come in. If you're too intimidated by the handout or by just doing your own lettering, we're going to do this. We're going to do a quick transfer. So this is really great. If you find a design that you really like and you want to add it manually on top of something, it doesn't matter if the paper is dark or light. You don't need any extra special tools. You just need a pencil. So I'm going to go to the other side of the paper. So we've got our season's greetings right here. On the back side of the season's greetings, I'm going to use my pencil and I'm going to lay down an even amount of graphite. I don't have to have it very, very thick or dark, but I do want to make sure that I am pretty generous with how I lay it down. But it doesn't have to take too terribly long. You just get that. Okay. All right, so we have our graphite sufficiently laid. And before we lay this on top of our paper, we want to make sure, just look at it and make sure that your piece is dry. Okay. And I'm going to use the light. So let's switch over. You can see like, okay, I'm going to use the light and I'm going to line up the sentiment how I want it to. And it might be a little bit different than how it's been laid out in the card. You just want to think the season's greetings and where your card is and where your plaid is. So I'm just gonna kind of pull that down and come over here, carefully place it on here, make sure that it doesn't move at all. And then I'm going to trace over my sentiment. And because this is watercolor and we've got the texture of the paper, it does not need to be perfect. So if it isn't perfectly level, don't worry about it. There's no need to worry at all. Maybe I'll make this flourish a little bit bigger. So this is where it gets a little tricky because we want to make sure that we have full control over our brush. Okay, so I just traced all of that out and it's hard, it doesn't quite pick up on camera, but do you see that little faint ghosting that's happening? Yes, Kathy hit the nail on the head. She just said, if it's too perfect, it will not look like a handmade card. And where's the fun of that? So that is really, really great. So I can see the season's greetings. I'm pretty happy with that layout in general. Now comes the intimidating part of lettering it out. So I'm going to switch batteries in my camera real fast and get you a better view of how to letter all of this. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. Well, you get to see my grandpa. Here we go. Okay. So I want you to see the angle of the pen, how I'm holding the pen, and how I'm loading up the pigment, because that really is what I want your takeaway to be today. So as I letter this out, if you have any questions, you can drop that. Oh, Peggy, you're so sweet. My grandpa, he is my grandparents, my grandpa and grandma, they are 98. They turned 98 in September, and they are the sweetest things. I love them so much. It was fun to have them. My grandpa is the reason why I painted. He would, every Thanksgiving, he'd have us have a little sleepover. It was like girls' year or boys' year. And each year that we got to do the sleepover, he would pull out all of his oil painting supplies. And as a mother pulling out oil painting supplies for my own children, I realized what a gift. So he gave each of us a canvas and he gave us some ideas to draw from. and he helped us paint a painting every Thanksgiving evening as our little activity for our sleepover. And this is really what got me into art. My first painting I did at 4 or 5 years old, and still have it. And it's really sweet. So my grandpa is one of the main reasons why I do art today. He supported and has enabled my love for the arts. So little shout out to Grandpa Newton. So let's pull up this pigment. We're doing the same thing we did with those fine lines. I'm twisting the brush as I pull up the pigment, and I'm going to use that nice high pitch. So the pen is on this knuckle right up here, and I'm using a very light touch, and I'm allowing the brush to work its way around. So see how I almost flicked right there? That brush nearly flicked and made a, splatter. It's okay if you have splatter and flicking. It's totally fine. I stopped short, and I'm going to come in from the other side to get a nice clean edge. We love our grandparents so much. They're the best. Okay, with this E, I'm doing a C shape, and sometimes it helps you get the most control if you just draw 2 directions. And I'm just pulling that pigment ever so slightly. I'm just leading it across the paper so lightly and delicately. And I'm going slow. I want you to give yourself permission to take time and go slow this holiday season, to take a beat, to do what really brings you joy. And hopefully that's creating some beautiful things for your friends and family. I'm doing this O in 2 C's, a forward C and a backward C. That's going to give me the most control here. And downstrokes are going to give you the most control. Upstrokes are going to give you the least amount of control. So I'm just doing mostly downstrokes. Okay, now I'm starting to get a little light on my pigment. That tells me that I need to add more pigment so that I don't run out. Tammy asked what size this is. This is the large water brush. But the Sakura has the small water brush. It's really, really great for fine liners, but this works really well too because it has a sharp enough point. Okay, so this, I'm going to be doing a lot of this in downstrokes. I love pulling things off the edge. So I make that the center just a little bit bigger. All right, does anybody have any questions for me as we finish up? The brush that comes in the watercolor kit, I believe, oh man, it's been so long since I opened mine up. I want to say it's the medium or the small. I don't think it's the large. Okay, this big swoop that I'm doing, I want to use my whole arm to pull it towards my body. That's going to give me a nice smooth line, pulling it towards my body, lifting up before I have an upstroke so that I have full control of that line. Okay, lower my water brush up again and cross the T. So you see how I'm not doing everything in one stroke. It may appear like I'm doing it in one stroke, but it's really in many, many, many strokes. So that's why we want to think about slowing it down, doing it in lots of little tiny strokes, and just getting more confident with our brush. Okay, oops, sorry. So we've got our card. Now, one last thing, because it's the holidays, and what would the holidays be without a little glitter? I have my clear glitter brush, and I'm just adding it to my plaid so that when this gets opened, that glitter is going to catch from the sunlight. Hopefully there's some sunlight. And it's going to add, the camera here doesn't pick that up, unfortunately, but it's really lovely. Add some glitter to it. Thank you, Peter. The Koi set comes with a medium 6 round brush. That's correct. So add a little bit of glitter. You can do the same thing with your envelope. And this is a great way to give you that like structure that you need for drawing an envelope. So you don't have to make fancy letters. You can just do a little plaid on there and then it's good to go. And it's going to be so eye-catching and fun. Just don't forget to leave a space for your postage stamp. Thank you again, everyone, so much for joining with me. If you'd like more classes, I teach classes online at calligraphy.org. And hit me up on Instagram. I'm at Melissafer, like Melissa and calligrapher came together. I'd love to see what you've done. Tag me on your posts. I hope you send out something amazing this holiday season to a friend or a family member. You have all been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so, so very much.